Kentucky's recognized for any questions he cares to pose to the panel.
I thank the chairman. Let me just point out, if we had the RAINS Act, we wouldn't need so many CRAs. And also, I think it's Congress asserting our responsibility to legislate. I mean, what we're doing when we pass the CRA is saying, no, well, the executive branch has expressed an opinion to make something have the force of law, and we're saying, no, thank you. We'll go about doing that job, which was given us in the Constitution, given to us. It's not very often we have a rule that deals with fentanyl and truck motors at the same time. Maybe we could get the truck motors to run on fentanyl if it's so concentrated. But let me start with the truck part of this. I've owned an F-250 for 26 years, the same F-250 actually, and I've owned an electric car for 10 years. And I went to buy another F-250 for my farm, haul cattle, hay. And I thought, well, let's look at the electric ones. They don't make an electric F-250, and we'll get to why here in a bit. It'll be obvious. But I could make an F-150 work, and they make those electric. You can't get to the stockyards and back in an electric car or in an electric truck. It's not practical. It's the F-250 and the comparable trucks that are made by GM and Dodge, those are the meat and potatoes of entrepreneurs. If you look at what is the backbone of what they use to get the job done, it's going to be a 3/4 ton or a ton truck. Farmers, this rule that the administration has promulgated is very regressive. As you said, Mr. Johnson, it's going to hit the farmers, the landscapers, the home builders, the surveyors, anybody that needs a professional truck is going to be hit by this at a time when it takes a year sometimes to get one of these trucks. They're in such high demand, and it's so hard to produce them with the supply chain we've got. Can you talk a little bit, Mr. Johnson, about why this rule is regressive, to have the same thing applied to semi-tractor trailers that applies to a farmer's truck?
Well, absolutely, and regressive is a very good word, because as I mentioned earlier, when you're talking about small operators like farmers, like the independent truckers, even with the 18-wheelers, independents that own maybe one or two trucks, and that's their livelihood. The owner-operator is sitting in the cab of that truck, operating it day in and day out. They're not going to be able to afford to go to the new technology and spend the $8,000 that's required. They're going to stay with their old truck, because you can get a lot of miles out of these trucks. You can keep overhauling the engines. You can keep working on them. They'll go for a long time. You're going to keep the old technology on the road, but you're essentially going to continue emitting NOx from those vehicles because the technology to do what the EPA is suggesting is not even there. It's very similar to what they're trying to do with carbon sequestration. I'm not against carbon sequestration, but it hasn't been adequately demonstrated yet. And when you talk to companies that have to put carbon sequestration on their power generation plants or on their manufacturing plants by 2032, 2035, by 2040, if you don't have it, you can't operate. Those kinds of things, you're not going to accomplish ultimately what you're setting out to accomplish.
And I think you made a great point just now and earlier about unintended consequences. This is going to have it's going to have a different effect that's 180 degrees in the other direction from what they intend. If you don't see a lot of F-250s and F-350s in Washington, D.C.
Yeah.
You might see somebody come from Virginia here to remodel a bathroom, okay, but or you might see the Capitol architect have them. But other than that, you just don't see them here because we don't make anything in D.C.
Well, here's the kicker: $39 to $55 billion. When that 18-wheel truck driver spends $8,000 and buys a new truck to do that, who do you think he's going to pass off that increase in cost to?
Well, here's
to the person that he's hauling
Yeah.
for.
So it's going to hit the 18-wheelers and the independent owner-operators, which Mr. Pallone said there was nobody. Did you say, I don't want to put words in your mouth, you said the industry's not opposed to this, Mr. Pallone?
Well, what I said is, generally speaking, we didn't get much opposition from the industry. I mean, in fact, the matter is that the industry usually brings a lawsuit, and they didn't do it in this case, not that that's an only indicator. But I mean, I do want to say, maybe, I don't know if this answers your question, but, the final rule has all kinds of protections for small business owners in the trucking industry and flexibilities for compliance that were negotiated with the industry. I don't want to go through them all, but for example, longer useful life periods to allow manufacturers to improve durability of emission-related components, increase emission-related warranty periods to ensure better performance, also the period for filing a petition. I mean, there's a whole bunch of things that were done in order to try to accommodate small businesses, but I'm not familiar enough with trucks the way you are to comment on all these things,
I thought
I
I
gotta
heard
be
you
honest.
say a couple times that industry wasn't opposed, and then I heard Mr. Johnson give a list.
They may, I mean, I'm not going to dispute his list, but the fact of the matter is that there was a lot of negotiation with industry, and I think if you went back to those groups, they would say, yes, we had a lot of input, but maybe they
Let
still
me ask
don't like
Mr.
it.
Johnson to rebut that. Can you give us a list
Yes.
of the
Yeah,
industry?
what I said, Mr. Massie, was that there have been significant groups that are supporting SJ Res 11, which is the CRA, to reverse this rule. The American Trucking Association, the Owner-Operator Independent Drivers Association, Transportation Intermediaries Association, the National Tank Truck Carriers, Truckload Carriers Association, National Federation of Independent Businesses. They represent thousands of small business owners across the country. So I think there is significant indication from the trucking industry across the board that they support reversing this rule.
And I would add to that list American Truck Dealers and Truck and Engine Manufacturers Association,
And at least one farmer.
and at least one farmer, if not millions of farmers. Another unintended consequence, when you're on the interstate, and I've recently been driving back and forth from D.C. to Kentucky, you notice as many of these small carriers, F-250s, F-350s, typically a dually, carrying pulling a trailer behind it, a gooseneck trailer, they are carrying what would be less than a full load for a semi. If we regulate those smaller trucks out of existence, you're going to have the bigger trucks carrying a load that's a quarter of their capacity, emitting more than the smaller truck does now. If you had a brand new truck under these regulations, a semi-tractor trailer truck that's hauling practically an empty load because there's no other way to get from A to B because we've regulated the little guys out of business. They call it, this niche is called hot shots, where they use a dispatcher just like the big trucks, and they find loads and they go get them, and they do it very efficiently. And it's one person that typically own their truck.
You're
and their
right.
Trailer.
You're right.
So when they're gone, we're going to have semi-tractors that are a quarter full. So I support the CRA to repeal this. We really should be writing these laws ourselves and not leaving this up to, this is in the tens of billions of cost. I can understand if it's just a little adjustment to some law that we wrote. That's not what this is. This is making it from whole cloth. I won't go on any longer on that, and I have just a very quick question on fentanyl for you, Mr. Griffith, which you might have anticipated. Where in Article 1, Section 8 do the founders give us the authority to pass a bill like yours?
Specifically, which portion?
Well, your bill regulating fentanyl or synthetic versions of it, we have certain enumerated powers, and which of those enumerated powers are you relying on to promulgate this law?
Well, and the gentleman raises a good question. That's not the purview of the bill. You raise a good question, but we'd have to throw out a lot of laws if we don't have authority to do this one. You're probably right, but I'm not here to fight that battle today, just like I'm not here to fight the battle of mandatory minimums today.
Okay, that's all I wanted to hear, and
appreciate
now that I've heard I was right, I will yield back.
Gentlelady from New Mexico is recognized.